Well, g'day and welcome back to my educational series on long range hunting. It's been a while, been very busy. So today what we're going to get into is the topic of ballistic calculations. Basically what happens when you have all your ducks in a row and you've basically got your rifle set up and you're ready to go out. You've done your loading. Kind of the scenario I'm going to put down is it's your first time at the range with your new long range rifle, and you want to set it up correctly, and you also want to verify those shots out far. And even I'm going to go into, you can probably see on the board behind me here, got a little picture of a deer, and we're going to go into your first shot that you're going to make out at long range. So it's going to be quite a goodie. I think I've got a fair bit of experience to share on this topic as well, because of basically the amount of shooting that I've done out that far and some of the things that I've picked up along the way. So let's jump in and get right into it. So the video will be broken up into kind of three different categories. The first one will be sort of what you need to do at home in your workshop, or like where I am. The second category will be what you need to do and set up with your rifle at the range for that first initial shooting. And the last category is when you take your first cold bore shot at long range at a game animal hunting. So let's start with the rifle setup. Basically what I always tell guys is, however you are going to take that particular rifle into the field, into the hunting situation, is exactly how you need to shoot at the range. What I mean by that is, don't go to the range with one type of bipod on, like a Harris, something nice for the range, and then carry like a really ultralight bipod in the field. That's going to give you different results, especially when you start shooting on uphill inclines and things like that. Also, the way you hold your rifle. I hold my rifle in a particular way. There's people who disagree with the way I hold my rifle, but it makes sense to me, and the results have always been pretty good. So the way I personally hold my rifle is I never apply any pressure on the fore end when I'm taking a lying down long range shot. I'll let the rifle, what I call, free recoil, and so I'll always tuck my second arm underneath the buttstock with me, because I want to let that rifle recoil the same way every single time. So your rest system, the scope, don't go to the range and chuck a big scope on, like a 30 power scope, and then change your scope out. That's not a wise idea. Just keep the rifle exactly the same as how you're going to use it. The sling that you use, everything needs to be exactly the same. So when we're at home, there's a few things we want to do to set up our ballistics calculator. And when I mean ballistics calculator, I'm not meaning a piece of paper. You can get away with a piece of paper if you're shooting a large magnum with maybe a lightweight bullet out to 350, 400 yards. You can get away with a piece of paper that just says, yeah, it's about this. But if we really want to start pushing past 500 to 600, 700 yards, we need to be using a ballistics calculator. I really recommend Strelok Pro. I think it's a fantastic platform that's not too cluttered, it's not too busy. You can turn a lot of the busyness off, but it's just a great platform to get you dialed in to where you need to be. Some of the main reasons why I recommend it as well is because of the angle compensation when it uses your camera. That's a fantastic feature, so it does the incline for you. It has a lot of reticles built into that app as well. There's a lot of good things in Strelok Pro that'll get you out to 700 yards really comfortably. It's like $19 New Zealand, so probably a lot less US, and it's just a great platform. So there's a few things that we want to do when we're setting up our rifle. Let's just start with the rifle in the workshop. What we want to do, and we want to input into our data, is basically we need to get our scope height, so from the bore to the center of the scope lens, we need to get that height. and use that in our input data. Then we also need to, on the day that we go to the range, we also need to input our zeroing weather, the weather at that current time, the temperature, not necessarily the humidity. Most phones, if you're in coverage, as soon as you hit the enable zeroing weather, it'll actually do it for you, which is really fantastic. But it's quite important if you go to the range and you sight in at 10 degrees Celsius or 49, 50 degrees Fahrenheit, that you have that inputted in your data when you do all your loads on that first time on the range. Another thing we want to do is we want to measure the length of our projectile. We need to input that data into the ballistics calculator. We want to measure the twist rate if you have to, if it's an older rifle and you're not quite sure. Usually you do that in your reloading, but we want to measure our twist rate, make sure we are not going to compromise our ballistic coefficient with a twist rate that's not good enough, and we need to input that data in as well. So that pretty much covers what you need to do, the data you need to input in for your rifle. So what I'm actually going to do is at the end of this video I will give you an example of how I would input all my data into Strelok Pro on the video. I'll just take a 6.5 Creedmoor as an example and show you how I would input all that in there. Then the next stage is we have our rifle ready, we have our ballistics data ready. Well, we have the information we need to create a ballistics sheet. We just are missing a few things that we're going to obtain when we go to the range for the first time. And so when you go to the range, there's a few things you really want to make sure you bring. Obviously, you really want to make sure you can bring a rangefinder. And I would also say, if you can get onto a range or an area on the same day that you can shoot to 600 or 1,000 yards, that is much better. And the reason why I say that is for when we validate our bullet trajectory, basically. Because if you come back on another day, your weather zero system might be slightly different, and you might have a little bit more wind or whatever. There's variants there that are not helpful. So you go to the range. I would say this is what you are aiming for when you are doing it. You want to bring your rangefinder. Make sure you bring all your Allen keys and bits and pieces for zeroing your scope, because I've done that before and it's not very nice. Then you also want to bring a chronograph. I would say even if you have to go and rent one, just go and buy one. You need a way to get your speeds. It just cuts the process a lot quicker and makes validation a lot easier. So a chronograph is it's not 100% necessary, but it's nice to have. And so yeah, you're taking your rifle exactly how you take it out in the field, to the range, ready to go, hopefully with your hand loads, not factory ammunition. I have a gripe against factory ammunition, but yeah, so you're at the range, you're setting up, and in your mind you're thinking of, basically, I want this rifle to shoot a certain way with the loads that I've got. I've done a whole video on reloading and what that looks like to get that right. But I would say that you're really aiming for a 3-shot cold bore group into 3/4 MOA or better. Now better is always better. Some rifles, and if we're really honest, I think with a budget hunting rifle, half an MOA is extremely good for a factory rifle. So when I say cold bore, what I'm meaning is you're not a target shooter where it's okay if your barrel warms up and you've got this big thick barrel and things like that. So I gap all my shots 12 minutes in between shots, just with the bolt open. I'm trying to let that all cool off so that I'm getting true cold bore groups, because that's what's important to me. In terms of chronographing, what you'll find with premium factory loaded ammunition, you're not really going to get velocity extreme spreads, which is basically the highest and the lowest speed, velocity, you're not going to get it better than 75 feet per second generally over 3 shots. If you do, you found something good. But generally they might group okay at 100 yards, but the spreads are not that great, which presents a problem out further. So at 100 yards everything can look okay, but as you start going out further, your groups really do open up. So if you shoot an inch at 100, you don't shoot 2 inches at 200, and you don't shoot 4 inches at 400 yards with a large spread like that. So in your pan loads, you really should be able to get, with the right componentry, you really should be able to get below 25 feet per second spread. That's even like that's being pretty kind. I don't think hunters need to be worrying about single digit spreads. I mean, we get them, you know, like, and I get them, and that's fantastic. But yeah, that's only if you really are into the reloading cult. So that's what we're trying to do. I would also say I would advise to work in MOA. If you want to work in mils, that's great, that's fine, but mils was really set for the military, so they could use mil ranging reticles and things like that. So I think MOA is a fantastic measurement to work with, and just very sufficient for what we're trying to do. Now, in terms of sighting in, you should be sighting in at 100 yards. All your hard work is done at 100 yards. And I will also say, and this is one of my personal little quirks, I sight in at 100 yards, 0, bang on, but a quarter MOA to the left. And I'll explain why. Well, no, I'll explain that now. I do that because I know that I eliminate some of my spin drift. So as that projectile comes down the range, I know it's going to be a little bit, you know, it's going to be a little bit more left at 200, and it'll carry on slightly left, like we're talking still under an inch, so it doesn't really matter. But at 500, that projectile is actually coming right because of the twist rate. So I don't need to worry about my spin drift, because, you know, I'm running tight twist rates, heavy projectiles. They do drift to the right on a right hand twist. So I just do that just to take a lot of that, take one of those measurements out of there, one of those factors out of there of my ballistic calcs, and I know that from 0 to 700 I don't have to worry about that. It's all in alignment. So a little quirk, but I've just figured that I quite like doing that. So now you go to the range, you got yourself a good group, 3/4 MOA better. You've got nice low spreads of velocity. You sight it in, and now that you've done that, there is something that you have to do that is fairly important, which your chronograph will give you a reading. Your ballistician from Hornady has given you a ballistic coefficient. Your chronograph's given you a reading, and you need to validate those two inputs into your load data. Okay, so you need to validate your ballistic coefficient and your velocity. And so Strelok Pro actually has a part of the application in there has a way that you can do that. So you basically set up something, a gong. You're not trying to check for wind drift or anything like that. All you're trying to check for is that your projectiles, your group, say a 2-shot group, is actually hitting at the right height. And if it's not, you can adjust either your ballistic coefficient or your velocity to suit the height that you are hitting at. So bearing in mind, you want to make sure that you know your exact range when you get out there, and things like that, so you're not giving yourself any false information. And you can do that at any distance. The further the better, but I would say once you start going out to 1,000, then you need to apply the principles of Coriolis effect and or very much finer atmospheric conditions and things like that. So you're probably better off doing it at 500 or 600 yards, considering you're going to be shooting at 700 anyway. And then once you've got that, then if everything's gone well, which it should, the better your group, the better this will go. Basically, the better your group, the lower your spreads. This becomes a whole lot easier. So I'd really encourage you to slow down in the reloading process and really get those groups dialed in really well. Yeah. Now, there's two things that I'm going to really hone in on and explain what I think become real killers when you're trying to take a long range shot, and these things are not factored in because, simply put, to read a ballistics chart or off an app and get the amount of MOA and put it into a scope is not difficult. It's not rocket science at all, but there's usually a few things that go wrong which mean people miss. And you do see, I've done it myself, and you see it a fair bit. Number one is angle compensation. So I think in the heat of the moment, a lot of guys use their rangefinder on and don't really realize the angle compensation really only works out to about 80 yards for bow mode. So what happens is they put the range in, just dial it up, but they could be shooting, like the other day I took a shot at 26 degrees. And the trick is to take your time there and really make sure you've got your angle compensation right. So in the Strelok Pro app on the phone, you can actually set it that you hit angle on slope and you hold your phone camera up to it where the animal is and you hit go, and it will put the angle in there for you and work it out, which is a really idiot proof way of doing it. But there's a few misconceptions about this. It's not difficult to understand, because if you're not going to use that and you're going to use paper drop charts, there's just one thing that you really need to understand in trigonometry is basically it doesn't matter if you shoot up or down, you always deduct yards. So you go your opposite, your adjacent, and your hypotenuse. If you're shooting down, you are wanting this for your gravitational pull, this angle, this distance for your gravitational pull, not this. If you're shooting up, it's basically just a mirror image. This is what I show people. It's identical but a mirror image. That's all it is. So if you're shooting down, it's that. If you're shooting up, it's that. It's got nothing to do with the amount of angle or things like that. The bullet is still in flight the same amount of time. So that sorts that confusion about if you shoot uphill, do you need to add yards on? If you shoot downhill, do you take them off? No, that's not how that works at all. And this I think shows it very basically like this, is that you've basically got a mirror. It's the same thing, a mirror image. So that sorts that one out, and then that's kind of easy. Once you've got that, you'll never lose it unless you never shoot much. And then I've got one other one which is part of ballistic calculations, and I think this one is the one that doesn't get enough attention and is the most difficult to get right. Is wind. So I don't dial for wind because I don't want to mess it up. So I've got a little rule for myself, which I'll show you back here for wind, that I never break. It's just become a solid habit, and I do believe it is a way you can ensure a lot higher that you don't lose your animals. So I'll bring you over to this and show you, well, unless you can see it from there. Yeah, I'll zoom you in. But anyway, here I have a deer, and I've got the kill zone on a deer. And so when we're long range shooting, we're never trying to head shoot or anything like that. That's ridiculous. So I've got a green dot here which shows basically where, you know, you've got your heart down here and your lungs, and you've got your diaphragm cuts it off. We don't ever want a projectile going back here. Never. Because the thing it will run off with a hole through it, and it will take 3 or 4 days for it to die. So my rule of thumb with wind is very, very simply this, is choose the largest caliber you can shoot, the largest cartridge that you can shoot comfortably and shoot well. And I think that what I do is basically on most deer you've got about 12 to 16 inches of kill zone width wise, and the reason why is because you've got a lot of main arteries running up and down the neck as well, and so what I do is I will do a calculation for the wind. The other day, or a little while ago should I say, a few months, I did not take a shot at an animal because he the whole time was feeding into quite a strong crosswind, and I knew if I was to give myself 40 inches of wind drift and I aimed, at his nose type thing and it came through, I'm just putting myself at so much risk that I've got my wind call wrong, and we get them wrong a lot, especially when you start shooting in like high constants with gusting. Then it's very difficult in the hills. So what I do is I always shoot my deer or anything with its bum into the wind, and I'll never ever hold past the kill zone, because I know, as long as I know my wind direction, which is usually pretty good where I hunt because there's a lot of flax, then I will know my projectile is going to drift in here somewhere. If I hold here and my wind call's wrong, that animal is going to be very wounded. And I know as well, it's better to put your projectile in the right place. You got your front shoulder there, which if you hit that, it's gonna hurt. And I'd rather drift off the front of the animal. This whole area in here, right through here, is extremely vital to the animal to stay alive. So if you put a bullet through there in any way, it's going to be a decent kill zone shot. So there you go. I don't think you need to stress out too much about wind calls and making sure they're absolutely perfect. I just think if you know that you're going to be gusting and your wind hold is going over 30 or 40 inches, it's probably time to say, this is not a shot I can make. Because basically you're just getting into this no man's land on a one-shot kill. That's my thoughts. Be interested to know what you think. Alright, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump on Strelok Pro on the application here on the phone. It's identical if you're Apple or Android, and I'm going to set up a new rifle and show you all of the things that I mean by what I've been talking about. So jump in with me and I'll show you. Have a look. Okay, so here we go. So I've got my new rifle in here, and I'm just going to hit OK. So let's just say we're setting up a 6.5 Creedmoor. Why not, right? Because it's super controversial. So we've gone to the range and we've done all our shooting and our loading and all that sort of stuff, and we're happy with our group. And so we've got our zero distances we're going to set it at 100 yards. And let's say most scope heights are set at about 2 inches. So that's center of the bore to the center of your objective lens, which is at the end of your scope. And then let's just say let's just pick a scope that we're running, something that's pretty well known. Boy, there's a lot of reticles on here. Does it really matter? I don't know. Not really. Let's just say we're running a 4 to 16 by 50, or we can search it. Oh, and and go loophold, and we're going to run the fire dot in the VX5. Alright, pretty common, there you go. We'll run that one there, VX5 3 to 15. Okay, so what we'll do as well, we'll go on to so we've set the scope up and the zeroing there. Then we're going to go into here, and our rate of twist on a Creedmoor is usually 1 and 8.5, something like that, right hand twist. So you can check that. That's a whole nother video again. But alright, so we go into here. Let's say we're running the 140 ELD match bullet. Alright, and so we're going to run that. We'll put that into there. So the bullet diameter for a 6.5 is 0.264, 140 grains. Now ballistic coefficient I believe is 6.7 for that projectile, I think. So we'll run that for now. And then bullet length, so basically all I'll do is set that aside. Okay, set that aside. Looking at bullet length, I'm going to run that in inches. I think this is a not quite the right projectile, so don't take that as gospel truth. So basically all we're doing is we're running our calipers over there. Boom, 1.43 inches for our bullet length, and we're happy. We're set there. That will calculate our twist rate, which is not really necessary inside 700 yards, but still good practice. Alright, so we've done our chronographing. For what I tell guys, on the day you go out, let's say you're shooting at 20 degrees Celsius in your weather, and your chronograph ran exactly 2800 feet per second on the 140 ELD match. Basically, this is how this works. For every inside 700 yards, this is absolutely fine. So for every 5 degrees, the speed changes around 10 feet per second. And then I save that, so temperature sensitivity factor should be 1. So we save that. We don't want any vertical MOA correction. We save that, and that's pretty much good to go for our calculations. So if we come into the table here, you can see here's my energy out at 800 yards still, and I've got my windage here as well. So in terms of using this app, this is a really, so let's say we've got a scenario like the other day I had with my 26 Nosler. I've got an animal at 425 yards is what my rangefinder gave me, which was not true ballistic range because it's too far. Now if you click into that angle compensator, if I tip that up, and I can actually point that at the animal and hit OK, it'll give me 18 degrees. And when I hit recalculate, it'll take off half an MOA for that incline. Wind speed, and this is the wind direction, so that's what gives you your values of your wind. So that's a full value wind, 3/4, half, quarter, no value. So basically the direction of the wind, you can set that in there. Wind speed is obviously something that needs to be, you need to gain competency with that over time. But there you go, there's my Coriolis effect. You're not going to worry about that for going inside 700 yards. Not really, not yet. And here we go. So basically I hit my calculate here, and it's given me my data. So I always hold wind in inches, or I can work an MOA inside an MOA reticle, left to right. I don't dial for wind. And then I've got my elevation that I need to come up here. sitting right there. And that's how I calculate all my shots in there. So one thing I was talking about before was this. This is trajectory validation. So basically, got your distance, we come up, and if your hits are not perfectly aligned, you can actually, you might end up dialing, say, 6.8 MOA on that shot to get the height right, and it will give you your correct velocity. So it just hones it a little bit better in real life, rather than going off a chronograph every time. And it will either do that, or it will work the ballistic coefficient. So if you've got a bit of a cheapy chronograph, or you've dropped it a few times or something, you probably want to work here. If you're using certain projectiles like an AccuBond LR, all those sorts of things, if your twist rate is really tight, it will affect your ballistic coefficient. So you can basically, or if you're using a twist rate that's not quite fast enough, and maybe you're shooting like, I don't know, a 168 or a 175 out of a 1 9.5 twist, 7mm, then you'd want to do this exercise to get your true ballistic coefficient. So yeah, it's a really great little tool there, just to validate everything. So that's how I use the app, and find it a very good system.